Racial segregation became one of the most hot topics to be discussed in America in 19th century. There were a lot of activists who contribute a lot in voicing up the voice of black people in that era. So hello Miss Rosa and everyone, my name is Kholis. In this opportunity, I would like to present you about one of the activists that contribute a lot in voicing up the right of black people in the 19th century. So without any further ado, let's start the presentation. So in this video, I would like to present you about, I would like to tell you a little bit about William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, and I will tell you further about his contribution towards racial segregation that happened in America in the 19th century. So Du Bois was born on February 23rd, 1868. He was an American civil rights activist, leader, Pan-Africanist, sociologist, educator, historian, writer, editor, poet, and also scholar. He was born and raised in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. He had two children with his wife, Nina Gomer. He became a naturalized citizen of Ghana in 1963 at the age of 95, which is the year of his death. So talking about Du Bois, he played a big role in voicing up the racial discrimination towards colored people. As a scholar, Du Bois' life and work were inseparable mixture of politics and also polemics. All of his efforts were geared towards gaining equal treatment for black people in a world dominated by whites, and toward marshalling and presenting evidence to refute the myths of racial inferiority. Du Bois identified as a socialist and belonged to the Socialist Party from 1910 to 1912. From his earliest years, Du Bois was a prolific, gifted scholar. In 1884, Du Bois graduated from high school as valedictorian. He received his Bachelor of Arts from Fisk University in Nashville, in 1888. Having spent summers of teaching in African American schools in Nashville's rural areas, in 1888 he entered Harvard University as a junior, took a Bachelor of Arts cum laude in 1890, and was one of the 6 commencement speakers. From 1892 to 1894, he pursued graduate studies in history and economics at the University of Berlin on a later-found fellowship. He served for 2 years as professor of Greek and Latin at Wilberforce University in Ohio. So, before he became the director of a major study on the social conditions of black in Philadelphia, he concluded from his research that white discrimination was the main reason that kept African Americans from good-paying jobs. Du Bois received his Master of Arts from Harvard in 1891, and in 1895, he became the first African American to receive a doctorate from the university. His dissertation was entitled The Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States of America in 1638 to 1870. So it was published as number 1 in Harvard Historicals. Talking about Du Bois, it's not far from National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or usually called as NAACP. In 1905, Du Bois was a founder and general secretary of the Niagara Movement, an African-American protest group of scholars and professionals. Du Bois founded and edited the Moon 1906 and the Horizon from 1907 to 1910 as organs for the Niagara Movement. In 1909, Du Bois was among the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or usually called NAACP, from 1910 to 1934. He served it as a director of publicity and research, a member of the board of directors, and founder and the editor of the Crisis. So The Crisis was a monthly magazine at the time. In The Crisis, Du Bois directed a constant stream of agitation, often bitter and sarcastic, at white Americans while serving as a source of information and pride to African Americans. The magazine always published young African American writers. Racial protests during the decade following World War I focused on securing and lynching legislation. During this period, the NAACP was the leading protest organization and Du Bois its leading figure. In 1934, Du Bois resigned from the NAACP board and from the Crisis because of his new advocacy of an African American nationalist strategy that ran in opposition to the NAACP's commitment to integration. However, he returned to the NAACP as Director of Special Research from 1944 to 1948, so it lasts for about 3 years. During this period, he was active in placing the grievances of African Americans before the United Nations, serving as a consultant to the United Nations Founding Convention in 1945 and writing the famous An Appeal to the World in 1947. In 1895, black educator who was known as Booker T. Washington delivered his famous Atlanta address, in which he accepted segregation but wanted African Americans to be part of the South economy. 2 years later, Du Bois wrote, "We want to be Americans, full-fledged Americans, with all the rights of American citizens." He envisioned the creation of an elite group of educated black leaders, the talented 10th, who would lead African Americans in securing equal rights and higher economic standards. So after that, the issues was continued to Du Bois attacked Washington's acceptance of racial segregation, arguing that this only encouraged whites to deny African Americans the right to vote and to undermine black pride and progress. Du Bois also criticized Washington's approach at the Tuskegee Institute, a school for blacks that Washington founded as an attempt to educate black boys and girls simply as servants and underlings. Lynching and riots against blacks led to the formation in 1989 of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, an organization with a mainly black membership, except for Du Bois, who became the editor of the organization. The Crisis, the founding board of directors, consisted of white civil rights leaders. The NAACP used publicity, protests, lawsuits, and the editorial pages of the Crisis to attack racial segregation, discrimination, and the lynching of blacks. Booker T. Washington rejected this confrontational approach, but by the time of his death in 1915, his Tuskegee vision had lost influence among many African Americans. By World War I, Du Bois had become the leading black figure in the United States, but he became disillusioned after the war when white Americans continued to deny black Americans equal politics and civil rights. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, Du Bois increasingly advocated socialist solutions to the nation's economic problems. He also questioned the NAACP's goal of a racially integrated society. This led to his resignation as editor of The Crisis in 1934. So after that issue, Du Bois grew increasingly critical of U.S. capitalism and foreign policy. He praised the accomplishments of communism in the Soviet Union. In 1961, he joined the U.S. Communist Party. Shortly afterward, he left the country. renounced his American citizenship and became a citizen of Ghana in Africa. He died there at age 95 in 1963. So Du Bois never took part in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, which secured many of the rights that he had fought for during his lifetime. So that was all about William Du Bois. I hope you all enjoy this video. So thank you very much for having me and have a great day.